Chapter 3. Endogenous Sigma. Blue was matter-of-fact as he manipulated the bureaucratic statistical quotas, coldly reassigning a node's social status, even recategorizing innocent, statically significant compliant nodes that were just within the confidence interval, rendering them as redundant nodes as he amended the dynamic confidence interval quotas. Different nodes moved around to different fates, all done with an unbiased indifference. Perhaps he rationalized that even though he may be destroying a node and family's life for statistical efficiency, he was being unbiased and devoid of any malice. Therefore, that did not make him bad. This was not an uncommon mentality of the new generation of neutered, non-violent, office psychopath. Office managers were devoid of empathy, indifferent. They exhibited many qualities on the checklist of a non-violent office psychopath which state utopia and the Ministry of Inferences encouraged within the beta node ranks as ruthless nodes, excelled at achieving work targets, and were loyal to total statistical conformity. Blue was a prime example. Whilst he orbited the upper region of his compartmentalized work environment, he considered himself trapped within the utopian state's hierarchy caste system. Yet his ambition was to rise to the alpha level, a position far above the regular endogenous sigma nodes. Yet he was loyal to the state's propaganda of hard work and was completely obedient to the monthly statistical dynamic quotas. Therefore, he was quietly optimistic that he may be promoted into the alpha ship one day. He approached me asking, "Are you going to celebrate your successes in receiving your alpha ship probation letter by coming to the bar tonight and watch Ortaki's speech tonight?" I politely replied, "No." Blue's psychopathic nature boiled with jealousy inside. He was my supervisor. I was his subordinate. Yet I had usurped him by being chosen to be given the chance to be promoted into the alpha ship. Now I was in the limelight which shone down directly from the upper floors of the alpha, shining on me, not him. I would most probably be promoted into an alpha ship in the near future, and he would be left in my shadow, an obscurity. To a psychopathic personality like Blue, this was unforgivable. But he had to play within the parameters of office etiquette. So he beamed a false smile at me, a big Cheshire cat smile. "Come now, Bays, we need you to celebrate," he said. I noticed his subconscious aggression and jealousy, but I played the submissive role, a reverse psychology trick I used to deal with Blue. "Oh, no. Sorry, Blue. I'm far too busy for that," I replied modestly. Blue's eyes started to glare. "Too busy?" he questioned. "Yes. You will work even harder now to secure that alpha promotion," he rationalized. Perhaps if he was not socially engineered to be non-violent, he would like to have reached in and pulled my heart out. But Blue remained focused whilst he glared at me with his trademark Cheshire cat smile, yet his forceful mannerisms gave away what he really felt. Even though he felt hatred for me due to the jealousy of my success, his psychopathic nature's one trait was grandiosity compelled him to feel the need to ingratiate himself with the contemporaneous flavor of the moment, namely, myself. As did most of society, that social media feed-off and mainstream news was only interested in who was in the contemporaneous momentary spotlight. Nodes cared little about the past. Besides, the past was filled with lies to make the present status quo of the utopian state and the alpha seem squeaky clean. Blue wanted to bask in my light. to be a part of my success, or at the least to be seen even momentarily as partially contributing to my success. Yet, secretly, deep down in his bowels of his psychopathic psyche, he wanted to plunge a knife into my back for usurping him, I surmised. "Come and speak to me in my office. I want to hear all about it," boomed Blue. So all the office Sigma could notice his close association with the center of attention. I put on my jacket, while a few of the office Sigma started to leave their office cubicles. I would have preferred to have just went home and relax with a newspaper, read an old paper book, or surf the intranet, and indulge in a mindless comfort of familiarity within my daily routines, and consume quantized food rations, which I would hastily make from the nutritious mush in the manifesto. Yet the state expected me to join the endogenous Sigma of the Ministry of Inferences, to congregate at the crowd bar and listen to Prime Minister Autarky's quarterly budget speech, then afterwards celebrate the utopian state's new quarterly budget plans. I never really enjoyed socializing or celebrating within primary sample space, especially at night, as it usually entailed a cold, wet walk to some arbitrary tube station close by. I sat in the tube carriage, staring off into my imaginary plane of the imaginary numbers which hung inches over the real number plane of a random arbitrary passenger node, who stared with an equal intensity, his gaze fixed perhaps on the less mathematical, pure imagination of his mind. It was not confident as to where his consciousness was, at this time possibly reliving a past memory, or replaying a work conversation, where this time his ego got the better of his boss, only in his personal hidden imagined fleeting world, inches from my chest. As I sat there staring at a point, inches from the chest of fellow passenger nodes, whilst the tube hurtled noisily through the underground catacombs of primary sample space's never-ending passages, my mind freely considered the meaning of state utopia's statistical totalitarianism, of the Economic Efficiency Act, and how it affected the socio-economic positions of the state and nodes within. I conclude that everything was a number of sorts, everything organized into sets and categories, ready for storage or distribution, sold at the expected profit. Everything quantified and labeled with its barcode category and unique security identity. Everything in its place. Its place was a temporary, contemporaneous space, simultaneously transformed into a projected future expected value, to offset the cost of borrowing and the ever-increasing competitive economies of scale, to also serve the expected internal rate of return and remain net present value neutral in the economically efficiently society, constructed to have no uncertainty. The economically efficient model, its equation, a long river of computations, dynamic variables, and probabilities. Meandering, subtly, pooling and enveloping, invading each area of the state and the nodes within, ultimately cording and shaping the nodes' minds, its sediment forming their perceptions and ambitions, the fluid permeating into every convolution of their thinking. Everything has its price, everything its cost, everything financial correlated to balance on the highly strung, economically efficient model. Even inanimate nodes and corporations that exhibited negative net present value projections could be positioned to offset hedged positions or tax deductions. All probabilities are calculated. Only a certain probability frequency was allowed to happen within the state, within a contemporaneous period. Only rational choices, falling within the confidence interval, that tended towards profit maximization were allowed. All other possibilities falling outside of this range were eliminated from the model. The augmenter's state embedded algorithms which were even connected to the Central Fractional Reserve Bank, the centum corporations. Private investment banks, pension funds and insurance companies all trading on the efficient economic markets, all confident that their net present values were fixed and that nothing unsettling or uncertain would jeopardize their financial positions or the great economically efficient beta. That the great cash flow river, like the river Nile, which every year bursts its banks, letting precious alluvial fertilizing dividends soil soak into the corporation's investors' pockets and into the pension pots. Uncertainty affected negatively the investors' contemporaneous confidence in the great cash flow, which was highly leveraged due to investor avarice and the state's desperation to smooth each evitable recession period and business cycle positions, with continual marginal positive growth in each financial quarter. Investors were forbidden to search for any arbitrage situations. The utopian state controlled aggregate demand and eliminated firm-specific risk, yet hypocritically allowing a dangerous amount of leverage to entice the investors to invest in the tightly restricted markets with predictable net present values, but punishing any market manipulator or alpha seeker, like the despicable Berkshire and Miller. Yet long-term growth, compounding, returns, tax shelters, and leverage were considered acceptable by the utopian state. Their position so leveraged that if the markets were to move just a few percentage points out of their expected range, it could spell disaster for the entire null hypothesis union's economy, if not the entire global economy. State Utopia's null hypothesis union and Zhou Pingjun's nodes Republic of the Harmonious Mean Union both practiced a unified dichotomy, each trading with one another in a vicious circle of leveraged financial derivatives, collateralized debt obligations, and sovereign debt, which perpetually churned out profits from bond coupons and dividends derived from an ever-expanding productivity and financial efficiency. Perpetually compounded non-linear returns were expected of each null hypothesis union state's individual great beta, irrespective of their current financial condition of their economies, GDP. Their long-term betas were expected to grow perpetually with a subtle, marginal, compounded exponential trend, and therefore was, by that definition, unsustainable if the time frame was to be extended indefinitely. The state utopia tried to overcompensate for this future possibility by continually deferring such as fall of its financial markets and fractional lending reserves, fiat currency, huge trading deficit and national debt to the central banks, by preaching that ever-increasing economic efficiency and more specific individual and sector aggregate demand regulations and working hours. Using the river metaphor of the great Beta River meanders up the valley and the hills, always upwards, its ripples white noise of the firm specific risk. Large swells and breaking waves, the alpha returns which were non-existent, just a smooth river flowing, counterintuitively upwards, slowly, subtly, meandering upwards with its tiny ripples roaming upon the surface, their naturally occurring firm specific risk, correlated in their unfathomable chaos of pulses and inferences, all affecting each individual's circular ripple pulse. Some were magnified slightly, others phased out, yet all acceptable. Natural organic motions of the complex financial markets, and even more complex society. A dynamic fluid, strict of the state, where all white noise, micro, marginal moments and forces that even the great statistical, economically efficient controlling state could not iron out entirely. Yet eventually, the white noise residuals were smoothed out by the least quarters equation to an average of 0. Then, the net present value of each specific firm's financial returns eroded to 0, the great equation of the model up. Beta up, alpha flat equals a strong economy, was another one of state utopia's great mottos. The state's great fear was that continual growth, each financial quarter every year, would enviably dissipate. Then a dreaded recession. Even though officially there was permanent recession, which was used as an excuse to marginalize the node's utility and consumption quotas. The economy could not expand forever. Central banks could not create unlimited fractional credit forever. Central banks, lending the utopian state officially accepted fiat currency, an almost counterfeit credit, washed with a respectable veneer in the guise of government bonds and terms such as quantitative easing. The smaller local retail banks could not provide unlimited credit to local businesses forever in a floundering, debt-ridden economy that provided very little that was tangible apart from the countless incarnations of the individual's manifestation, which in many cases were short-lived and were soon tossed back down the mushpipes. Even the great Centum Corporation-based beta could not produce a perpetually compounding growth indefinitely. State utopia, after many decades of fighting Zhou Pingjun, became envious of the consistent, rapid growth of the flourishing Zhou Pingjun economy. State utopia began imitating the Zhou Pingjun by slowly assimilating many of their economic and societal agenda. Many of the Zhou Pingjun agendas were adopted by state utopia. It was their blueprint for many of their new policies, escalating the utopian state's strict statistical regulation to become a subtle, all-pervasive totalitarianism ether. Both blocs were influenced to the point of total control by the cold, impartial, rational statistics of Economic Efficiency Act of the administrators of these efficiency quotas, the Ministry of Inferences, and the Artificial Intelligent Augmenter. State utopia was now rumored to be even more ruthless than the Eastern Zhou Pingjun bloc, which still suffered totalitarianism under its socialist indoctrination and ideology. Yet state utopia was devoid of compassion. It had been substituted by the cold ruthlessness rational of the Economic Efficiency Act, forcing the nodes to choose the most rational choice or the most cooperative dominant strategy to maximize their individual payoff each moment, as well as the invisible murderous hand of the confidence interval that preened society, of inefficient nodes directing society in the right direction, towards the utopian state, sanctioned mean, and its acceptable sigma variance. As I drew a conclusion to my thought rambling whilst upon the tube carriage, my thoughts were disturbed immediately by the overly loud announcement that the tube station had arrived. I jumped out of the imaginary plane, back into the Cartesian coordinates of the real world, and automatically began to process out of the tube carriages as all the other nodes did, without thinking. I made my way down the main road and met the Ministry of Inference's beta work colleagues at the entrance of the foyer of Section Sigma Shopping Mall. It was filled with the middle to upper sigma caste of the endogenous sigma castes, mainly gamma and beta nodes, with a few fortune delta nodes that were groomed on their probationary period as they were on the verge of possible promotion to one rung higher social status. The middle and upper spectrum of endogenous sigma, devoid of the lower sigma nodes, sat around the busy restaurant tables chatting or hastily finishing off some overdue work, whilst they stared intently into their laptops. A small percentage had regressed to a passive, insular, voyeuristic role, sitting alone or in small groups, scrolling around on their embedded devices, intermittently looking up to steal a few fleeting glances at their preoccupied neighbours, observing the latest aspiring beta fashion and gossip. Binomial shouted out to the group as we entered the dimly lit bar aptly called The Crowd. We walked towards Binomial's crowded table, which was full of moderately important beta nodes of the Ministry of Inferences. We all greeted each with some genuine affection, but also because it was the expected emotional response to a given, official, social gathering by the statistical algorithms, even though most of them hardly communicated with each other on a daily basis, as we were in different departments. Binomial offered us a round of drinks, all paid for by the Ministry of Inference Bonding petty cash account. Binomial's bold, cheeky character was now in his element. At work, he was cheeky and cheerful, yet was careful to limit his emotions and chatter, to stay within the confidence interval of the strict statistical expectations of the Ministry of Inferences, implied thoughts and expected routines. Now, he felt slightly more relaxed, but still conscious of the continual monitoring and statistical inferences of all their current actions and emotions, implied thoughts and words, compared to the restricted model of the expected implied thoughts and routines of what a beta node's etiquette should be in a given situation. Binomial's constant, loud, contagious laugh resonated throughout the bar and reverberated amongst the beta around the tables. His contagious laugh, a tool that got him out of most embarrassing questions or situations. They all sat around chatting, becoming more obnoxious as a new round of alcoholic beverages appeared. Soon the conversations had split up into different camps, as each group of colleagues found different conversations more interesting. Do you know what I hear? That the augmenter likes to stare at mice when it's not doing its calculations for the normalized state. Its hobby is to observe mice and rats in their mazes and containment. It analyzes and infers their movements for hours, said Bernoulli. Perhaps it sees the statistical movements and routines fascinating, I replied, half interested. Perhaps, he replied ominously. I watched out of the corner of my eye as the patrons moved around the bar. I was always fascinated by the sigma nodes, behavior, and routines in general, as I had studied statistics and econometrics. Just then some patrons shouted for the waitress to turn up the volume on the monitors. The bar manager realized what was happening and turned off the music, whilst simultaneously all the patrons regressed back into their default mode of compliant endogenous contributing sigma nodes. The busy bar, normally loud with chatter and music, went remarkably quiet, as all the nodes stopped what they were doing and stared transfixed at the breaking news on the monitors. A reporter began his dialogue. The confidence interval criminals being judged in their absence today at the courts of justice were that of Berkshire and Miller. These two great manipulators of the financial system, who selfishly tweaked the financial markets to their favor, who selfishly produced one of the greatest sins that a node could commit, worse than treason. Manipulating the macroeconomic properties of the economically efficient state. Their heinous actions renders any mere economically inefficient node, who relative to their personal situation, naively becomes a confidence interval criminal. outlier, via a series of aggregate demand transgressions, pales into insignificance in comparison to these great macro outliers who concocted a poisoned chalice of financially engineered synthetic options to reap returns from manufactured financial inefficiencies. They wickedly conspired and constructed a great financial scaffolding that reached high into the economy's stratosphere. This great, ambitious abomination precariously swayed in the random breeze of international buyers' liquidity, which even the great state could not control. The selfish greed of these protagonists produced consistent microeconomic alphas, abnormal returns far in excess of the sacred beta. The sacred beta which hedges the state's accumulation of positive averaged capital gains, free of firm specific concerns, bringing consistent growth over the ages of posterity. These two great charlatans consistently manipulated the market's position by producing economic and financial inefficiencies, unpredictability, abnormal positive returns relative to the beta's return, breaking the sacred beta up into fractions of its great self, into mere multifactor models, and the sacrilege of perverting the very life pulse of the state's great beta. These two were the worst transgressors of the state. Selfish macro manipulators without limits. Yes, confidence interval criminals to the nth degree. Who risked the very fabric of the economically efficient state by manipulation and speculation, playing up different sides, engineering financial inefficiencies, creating financial turmoil in the great cash flow river. They even amended code in the state's financial servers to alter the high-frequency rhythm of the economically efficient state's ebbs and flows of the economic trading harmony. Shame on them. Shame on these great transgressors who, with every advantage, with every privilege, willfully and shamelessly brought inefficiency into the great economically efficient state which protects and nurtures each vulnerable node in the cumulative average by averaging out every transaction, every movement, every thought into a safe mean. A mean devoid of extremes, extremes that brought harm, chaos, and change. Why change the great economically efficient state? Why alter the perfect, safe harmony? The crowd started to boo when pictures of Berkshire and Miller were shown on the screens. Under their pictures scrolled the provisional date for them to face capital punishment. The crowd began to excitedly shout, "Hang them! Hang them!" If only they could be found. They had escaped prior to a warrant being issued, running off into the pre-verbal night with their ill-gotten gains, the state so enraged by the duo. They had begun the criminal proceedings without them, and had found them guilty in one afternoon. Then the breaking news program cut to a close-up of State Utopia's Prime Minister, Autarky. His face created a montage on all the monitors and embedded screens. All the nodes within the bars shouted praise at their benevolent leader who exuded humility, which was his brand image. He was no more moral than the average Sigma node he just appeared to be. Irrespective of his moral standing, his hands were tied. He was just a puppet of the Alpha, as were all the political parties who acted as their rivals in alternate official parties. Even though they ruthlessly fought each other to a hopeless draw of opposing political opinions, right into the expected mean which was set by the Alpha, as per usual. I hope the nodes are as proud as I am of this great state, stated Prime Minister Autarky. The crowd in the bar cheered, accentuated by distant cheers from other bars situated further down the mall. I think we should move forwards. towards greater freedoms for the nodes, disproportionate rights and opportunities, greater empowerment for the previously marginalized nodes. This great utopian state allows such freedoms, such tolerance, unlike Zhou Pingjun. 2 decades ago, our party, the Freedom Party, legalized recreational drug use. I personally believe in increasing the boundaries of liberalism to one day having no boundaries. He concluded his statement shouting, "A progressive society," whilst raising his arms in the air. The crowd applauded to engross in the liberal sentiment, momentarily forgetting the rigorous statistical control of the state and its restrictive effects on their lives. Autarky was oblivious to how far gone his liberal agenda had become. It was perhaps a deluded, futile attempt at substituting moral decay in the form of liberalism to counterbalance the rigid statistical control of the economy and state. The Alpha were not concerned about a node taking drugs or being promiscuous as long as they consumed the correct amount of drugs and remained within a quota of promiscuity. And they cared not about immorality, only statistical control, the cornerstone of their power. It was easier for Autarky to believe his own propaganda than face the truth that he had no real power over the state, which ran like clockwork always to the tune of the Alpha and their statistical quotas. He was only aware of 5% of the state's affairs. He was even unaware of the Arcadian Express. The Alpha regarded Autarky as a harmless fool, their puppet, who they allowed to rage on about liberalism, while he attacked any node who opposed their values, while all the time the confidence interval and the state's mechanism oppressed the nodes with a statistical stranglehold on their lives, thoughts, and actions, even their future, predicted actions. The ever-increasing liberalism was a corrosive thought virus, comparable to any extremist or fundamentalist beliefs, responsible for the breaking down of a society's moral fabric. Yet it was nothing more than a futile, hypocritical illusion of freedom, a facade hiding the true nature of state, the contrary, the cold, ruthless, statistical efficient control by the state and corporations. Autarky was compelled to add a statistical message at every speech that the Alpha's economic harmony lobby group always requested. Autarky boomed out his speech. Before the great economically efficient statistical revolution, 1 billion nodes starved a day on Earth. Do you know why? Because of democracy. The crowd murmured at the concept of democracy. Populations, especially in developing states, they had the right to choose their own governments and their own economic destiny. They had the right to democratically elect who they wanted to run their state. But they were ignorant, they were uneducated, they were crippled by their own archaic cultures, religions, and perceptions. Their thinking co-integrated with their antiquated inferior cultures, histories and perceptions of persecution from invaders. Therefore they chose stupid governments, inefficient governments, and therefore they ended up starving. Autarky paused, then boomed out again. Starving. Suffering. Thinking that they were free. Free to choose, but they chose wrong. Or perhaps there was no choice. Perhaps there was a dictator on either side of the fence. Or perhaps they were too ignorant, too sectarian, too culturists, too whatever. Look at the history of the Western states. They are forever morphing and changing, shaping, over the years. Look at the map of the old Western continent, Europe. over 100 years, 200 years, 500 years, its borders morphing, pulsating, enveloping, and overlapping each other. He paused again, then boomed even louder. There are no states. There are no cultures. Just the one state, the glorious statistical state utopia, the utopian state that takes away freedoms and the liberties. Autarky then paused, looking around, looking for any opposition, yet he found none. He continued, but replaces them with an efficient, cold, ruthless statistics. Yet it brings prosperity, law and order, to even the mindless, to the uneducated, to the lost. The nodes, who previously had to rely on their own will, their own opinions, their tainted opinions, their biased opinions, their ignorant opinions, their old opinions. Democracy doesn't work. We need totalitarianism. A subtle, statistical totalitarianism. All-pervading, yet all-accepting. Completely unbiased. Just judging you. The nodes on your current data. Your contemporaneous data. Your contemporaneous results. Your adherence to the quotas. Your adherence to the normalized caste distribution that you are given. That is all that counts, my dear nodes. Not your ideals of democracy, of freedom and free will. Those are all illusions. Individually, maybe they are good, but collectively they are corrupt. They are inefficient. They lead to a weighted, skewered deviation from the efficient path. The most rational path, the most normalized path, the average path, the mean path. No, the path that is skewed because of an individual's based, tainted past thoughts, their tainted beliefs, their cultures, their religions, their histories, their nations, their perceptions, their incorrect, ignorant sample of opinions and knowledge. It all leads to suffering. That's why 1 billion nodes starved in the world. It's not because of the banks. It's not because of the colonist. Not because of all the slighted feelings of past anger, of past frustrations, of slavery, of colonialism. There has always been slavery and colonialism long before the slavers and colonist. There has always been suffering. There has always been trouble. There has always been... He paused. Inefficient thinking. Inefficient direction. There has always been a weighted negative externality, forcing down subtly and blatantly upon the sigma, upon the nodes, the kings and queens, the monarchs and religious leaders, all skewering, tainting, guiding and augmenting into the wrong direction, instead of a free-flowing direction that tends toward the known contemporaneous mean given by the great utopian state. But we are the state. We are the ones who guide, generously, guide the nodes of the different caste, who are predominantly ignorant in their individual sample knowledge and perceptions of the state, predominantly individually inefficient, like unbiased, lost unbiased. But we guide them to the fixed known mean, to a mean that we set, a mean of harmony, of statistical bliss, where you, the nodes, you are forever safe, within the mean, within the average, never too much, never too little, always just enough, concluded Autarky proudly. The announcer then said proudly, "The Fraser theorem, expanding a liability hypothesis. By expanding a liability to its limit, it immediately transforms into an absolute value, the opposite there. Therefore an asset, ceteris paribus. Any idealistic relative variable expanded to the limit transforms immediately to the opposite magnitude of the imaginary number plane, the absolute value. Therefore military conflict pushed to the maximum limit immediately creates peace. Nuclear weapons create a Cold War, peace. Millions of nodes conforming to regulated statistical quotas pushed to the limit. Create freedom for the individuals as millions of other nodes are producing goods and services to the benefit of the individual's needs and utilities. So it sounds like a contradiction, it sounds like propaganda, but it is not. It is a fact, according to Fraser. Therefore, statistical quotas are freedom. The individual nodes' personal egos and ambitions realized within their extreme sigma monthly residuals are stochastic, directionless inefficiencies. Yet, through statistical quotas, all the nodes are unified within state utopia. Their random individuality and combined will is averaged out by the cumulative sum total of all nodes' activities and intentions to produce a harmonious, non-stochastic, stationary no mean of this great unified state utopia. Obedience is mastery, which state would challenge the great unified null hypothesis union or state utopia. Countless millions, even billions of nodes, all marching to one tune, one frequency, one monthly quota, all obedient to one statistical direction. Yet individually we are insignificant, yet unified we are strong. We are the masters. Therefore, obedience is mastery. Privacy is perverse. Privacy leads to secrets which lead to bad habits, inefficient non-stationary thoughts, intentions and routines. Privacy leads to a cointegration, devoid, uncorrelated association with the great regression function of state utopia, regressing into an almost exogenous redundancy unified with the contribution endogenous nodes. Reduced disposable income due to higher taxation leads to greater wealth for the average sigma of the statistical state utopia which nurtures and guides us all. Concluded Prime Minister Autarky. Income minus tax, domestic autarky minus foreign influence, minus ourselves, our selfish will. To minus is positive, reduces the turbulence, the societal chances of failure and inefficiencies. Yes, vote yes, flashed some subliminal words very quickly at the bottom of the screen. Poorer equals richer. Think average sets you free. Free to follow the efficient mean derived by a collection of superior minds and calculations which surpass the individual working node. Flashed more messages. They all saw it but were not completely sure. Not it did not matter. They all believed it. They were all behind the speech. All behind the state. Autarky then lowered his tone, looking right into the television camera, and said, "Nodes, you need to strive harder to be average, to work towards an economic efficiency society, to bring it to full optimization for the good of the state, and of the unbiased of tomorrow. We should be thinking in terms of us, of others, not of ourselves. We should be working together, for the greater good, not for ourselves as individuals. Individual pain and suffering is irrelevant. Only the collective harmony is the concern. Cry, bleed, work for us, for the future, for an improved tomorrow. Today you, I, pain, sorrow, loss. It's irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. Statistical is fair. It is us. It is over all time, collected and averaged. Instead of a selfish me now, one instance, one fleeting moment of self-gratification, one moment of narcissistic introspection. Forget about the self. Think of us, together, not just now, but over time, in the future, in the now, in the past. Think average, think statistical, think unbiased. Be confident, concluded Prime Minister Autarky. The crowd clamped ecstatically in the bar. Then the screen. When blank, the music started to play again. Ortaki added, "It is also imperative that you report outliers who are economically inefficient nodes in the economy." Ortaki then finished again, booming out the state's catchphrase: "Think average, think mean, be confident." Even though Ortaki was a morally corrosive political, a well-meaning imbecile, a mere tool of the alpha, and a parental figure for the unbiased voting nodes, he was a great orator and rabble-rouser. The alpha knew that he was perfect for his role, and they continue to support him every election.